said the only beneficiaries would be Hamas and Iran. Well, Mohamed Taha joins me once again in the studio from BBC Arabic. Mohamed, the latest developments. The pressure is on Benjamin Netanyahu coming from all sides now, isn't it?
Massive pressure from President Biden, who said that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu does not do enough to reach a ceasefire deal. Pressure from the UK by scrapping some of the arms licensing. And the massive pressure is from inside. We saw the strike early in the morning. The court scrapped the strike, but there are still massive demonstrations, clashes between the demonstrations and the authorities. And then we saw Benjamin Netanyahu in a very rare open press conference talking against everyone. He was against President Biden, against the families of the hostages. He was against the demonstrators. It looked like it was Benjamin Netanyahu against the world in this in that sense.
So it's incredibly intense, the pressure on him personally and also within his own party as well. The politics is getting extremely complicated. In the meantime, the fighting continues in Gaza and on the West Bank. What's the latest?
Indeed, we have several deaths in the West Bank as the Israeli operation continues in Tol Karm and Jenin in particular. We have several deaths in Gaza because of the Israeli shelling. As Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said in his press conference, he would continue the war and he wouldn't do any concessions. Hamas replied on what he said by saying that there were clear instructions for the guards of the hostages after the Al-Nusayrat operation, when the Israeli forces managed to free some of those hostages, that whenever they feel the Israeli troops approaching, they have to do something. Unfortunately, unless there is a ceasefire deal, the consequences wouldn't be good.
OK, Mohamed, as always, thank you very much indeed. Well, I'm now joined by Laura Blumenfeld, who's a Middle East analyst and former senior policy advisor on the State Department's Israel-Palestinian negotiating team. Welcome to BBC News. So from your perspective, why does not Benjamin Netanyahu respond to all this pressure coming from within and from the likes of President Biden on reaching a deal?
Well, as your colleague Mohamed said in the studio, it looks like Netanyahu against the world. And that very much validates his point of view that, you know, as he said in April, when it looked like the United States was threatening to withhold weapons, if we have to fight with our fingernails, we will. He sees himself, you know, it's useful maybe to pull back a little bit and say, you know, how does he actually see himself? In one sense, very much like Churchill, like an inspirational statesman who is rallying the people from the brink of defeat to victory. He even before October 7th, he always identified with Churchill. He's also channeling a little bit of Henry Kissinger, who, when he was negotiating with the North Vietnamese, famously said that you cannot win at the negotiating table what you haven't earned in the battlefield. And I think that Netanyahu firmly believes that only military pressure and kind of gains on the battlefield, especially in Gaza, will get him what he wants from Hamas, which is, you know, complete military and political victory. And finally, the third thing is he has always been obsessed with being what he would call a sucker. I remember on the 50th anniversary of Israel, you know, 25 years ago, the banner headline in the Jerusalem Post, the daily newspaper, Netanyahu was prime minister then, his banner quote headline on the anniversary was, "We are not suckers." On October 7th, Israel was sucker punched. And part of it was because they were relying on technical sensors along that border there, including the Philadelphia corridor. So I think his philosophy is we won't be fooled again.